Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Tate Britain. My name is Sonia Dyer. I'm a curator of public programs here at Tate, and we're really happy to have this second event in the Paint Club series called Painting as Document. It's the second of two events, and it's in partnership with the University of the Arts London and the Paint Club Research Network that is part of the university. Tonight's event, or this afternoon's event rather, is chaired by Paint Club research members Alison Goodyear and Donald Maloney. And today's guest panelists are the writer and critic Barry Swarovski and the artist Claire Woods. Jeff Dennis is going to introduce the Paint Club network in greater detail in a moment, and also provide further information about an event that's taking place after today's panel event. What I'd like to do is just to give you a bit of housekeeping information. So in the first instance, in the unlikely event that we need to leave early, we simply leave the same way we came in. If you'd like to use the bathroom during the event, again, you leave the same way you came in, turn right, and ladies and gents on either side. You'd also found this information sheet, which has an evaluation form at the back. I know you always ask to fill out evaluation forms, but we do read them, we do pay attention to them, and it really helps us to build our program. So if there are any comments you have about today's events, or anything you'd like to see more of in the future, do use this to let us know. And you can either hand it back to me or one of my colleagues at the end, or you can leave it on your chair. So without further ado, I would like to again thank all our speakers and hand over to Jeff. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia, and thanks everyone for coming to this. We really want Paint Club to be a very open network for anyone interested in painting. So it's really brilliant to see this really positive response to events like this. So if you like what happens today, we hope you'll stay in touch with us and come to future events. We would also first like to express our gratitude once again to the Tate for hosting today's events, as well as to the CCW Graduate School and UAL Communities of Practice Fund for supporting our activities. Before I introduce our speakers properly, just a few words about, while I've got your attention, a few words about an exciting new development, which is the new Journal of Contemporary Painting, which is launched in October with an issue on art and cinema. It's a new international peer-reviewed journal concerned with exploring the culture and practice of contemporary painting in its broadest sense, and that includes research from other disciplines that relates in some way to painting. The first issue is out in October, and the second issue is already underway around the French painter Simon Hontai, and there'll be a roundtable discussion. There'll be an announcement about that on 3rd of June, so we hope you'll be following that too. The third issue is unthemed, and that's why I'm announcing this now, because we will have a call out for proposed articles, reviews, contributions to this. So if you're interested, there are some postcards down the front here which you can pick up after the event. Dan Sturgis, who's one of the editors, will be at the post-event reception. And you can look online, just search for the Journal of Contemporary Painting. So back to today. Incidentally, we should also thank those of you that have already sent in questions and issues for discussion, and we'll try and weave some of those into the conversation. Please remember that the paintings that the speakers have chosen to discuss from the Tate collection are on display, so we hope you'll take time after the talk to look at the real work as well as the projection up here. So we welcome Claire Woods in the middle there, artist and research fellow at Bath Spa University, well known for her sometimes enormous paintings based on natural forms and more recently sculpted heads, as well as for a large mosaic project for the Olympic site. Her current touring show in Kent at Mascal's Gallery includes lithographs so large that, and she assures me this is absolutely true, she had to hire a road roller to take the prints. The scale of some of her work in the past has prompted comparisons with Monet's mural-sized water lily paintings, but her processes are, of course, utterly different, taking forward the debate about the relationship between painting and photography. I first met Barry Schwabsky in the light shirt there nearly 30 years ago when he was editor of Arts magazine in New York. And since then, he's moved between USA, UK, and New York, writing with great insight about art, painting in particular, as well as publishing several books of poetry. His latest book, Words for Art, steps back to review other people's writing about art, deeply reflective about how we respond to art objects and artifacts and the ideas that float around them. It's on sale now in the Tate Bookshop. And after this talk, you will be irresistibly drawn to go and purchase this book. And you can take it to our post-talk reception at Chelsea Space Gallery, which is just opposite the side entrance to the Tate, across the big open parade ground space. And our stewards will be on hand to guide you, where you will find Barry, and he will instantly enhance its value of the book by signing it for you.
Can I add something? you can enhance it even more if you propose to Daniel Sturgis that you should review it in the Journal of Contemporary Painting. That will make it much more famous and in demand.
Thank you. The event is chaired by Donald Maloney and Alison Goodyear, who are both artists and working towards PhD degrees at University of Arts London. Both of them are concerned with analysing aspects of our relationship to paintings, as well as actually making them. Donald's research and painting focuses on particular slippages between the picture plane and picture surface, and the phenomenon of specular highlights. Alison, on this end, Alison's research focuses on the theme of aesthetic absorption, and both themes which are relevant to our discussion today. So now I'll hand over to them. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. Welcome, everyone. Just before we begin, I just thought I'd say something about where we came up with the idea of painting as a document, just before we talked to Barry and Claire about their choices of paintings. We're sort of building on the last Paint Club event, which was There's a Ghost in My House, which looked at the national collection in Tate Britain in ways that contemporary painters might be almost haunted, or I guess it's a different way of thinking about being influenced by paintings, almost that you can't kind of get away from certain painters. And we had 3 contemporary painters come in, and it was it was quite an interesting discussion, and we kind of thought about ways that we could have an event with Claire Woods and Barry Schwabsky in thinking about how might or might not a painting work as a document. And we think how it might or might not work actually might become quite important to how we talk about it, because can a painting be a singular type of document, like a historical source, or is it a more complex document? And by focusing on it as a historical source, are you kind of ignoring some of the more material aspects, its physical presence, and different ways of looking? So that's something that's kind of might be underlying some of the discussion that we have today. Okay, we'll also have time at the end for questions. Yeah, that's
right.
It.
So, starting with Barry. So Barry, you chose, if we change the slide, the painting The Reading Girl by Theodore Rousseau, which 1886-87. It hangs in the 1840 room, and it's surrounded by many pre-Raphaelite paintings, and it's one of the very few that is of a nude. When originally it was exhibited, it produced strong reactions, as demonstrated by the Spectator Review. Quote, "No human being, we should imagine, could take any pleasure in such a picture as this. It's a degradation," end quote. So does this writing, the symbiotic relationship between painter and critic, alter the work of art? Does painting then become a host to whatever is projected onto it, possibly becoming a different type of document? So bearing this in mind, could you talk a little bit about why you chose this painting and how it may or may not be a type of document?
Yeah, well, I wish we had it there for you to see.
Right. I apologise, sorry about that.
But it's interesting to me that it's in a room here that where it is quite different from everything else in the room, and yet I think that people don't notice it that much, quite high, and so it's a little bit hard to notice. But once you've noticed it, it really kind of, in its context, sticks out like a sore thumb. Okay, there it is. And this question of what's projected into a painting, I think, is something that's reflected by the painting itself, because obviously it's the subject of the painting is a process that we don't actually have access to, which is somebody reading, and what is she reading and what's going on in her mind as she reads it. We can really only project. We have no idea about it. Now, I also was thinking that the painting is unusual in the context of the room, but also in a bigger sense in terms of its context. And I wanted, my lovely assistant Donald is going to put us onto the internet. Yes?
Yeah, we're something
Yeah,
about the
good luck
split
with that.
screen. I think it's not going to work.
Oh, I don't want a split screen. I just want to have the...
I know, I think they... Yeah, he might be able to rework it there.
Okay. I was going to show you basically, very briefly, what happens if you
Whilst they're talking,
okay, what happens if when you type girl reading painting or reading girl painting into Google image search? Now we did have the Google window there for a minute. If we can just bring that back.
Okay. We got a small window.
Right. No, reading girl painting and image search, not the web search. Okay, and I don't know if we can make that any smaller so that you can see more of it on a... Okay, yeah, so that gives you a sense. And there are lots of paintings of all types and from all ages of girls reading. And they're all generally very kind of demure and fluffy. And I think one source for all this, actually maybe if you want to do it again, I think that the real source for images of women reading in Western painting are paintings of the Annunciation. So if you just put in Annunciation, you'll see that most paintings of the Annunciation don't have Mary reading, but there's a good subset of them that do. So in some of these, let's see, you can see that she's surprised by the archangel as she's reading a book. And again, we don't know what book she's reading because, you might think, well, she must be reading the Bible, but who knows? She must be reading some very devotional work because she is such a spotless character. Now, okay, so that's all I just wanted to show you from the Google, the source of this thematics of girls reading. So if we can go back to Roussel's painting, where it looks darker, I think, in this image than it does in reality, but it's in a rather austere geometrical setting, and the only curve is the curves of the woman's figure, and she's sitting at an angle that for reading seems kind of uncomfortable, and she's bending her neck forward in a way that particularly seems a bit of a strain. So you have a sense that there's an effort, and there's a bit of a frown in her eyes. There's some seriousness about the reading that's going on here, but we don't know what it is.
It could be because she's uncomfortable.
It could be, but why is she so interested? But still, she's so interested in the reading that she's going to make herself uncomfortable to do it. Now, behind her on the chair, there's a kimono draped, and the kimono is interesting because there's not too much that's known about Theodore Roussel, but one thing that we know is that he was an associate of Whistler. And of course, Whistler was the one who really started the fashion for Japanese accoutrement in both painting and in life in England. And this particular, the model, her name was Hetty Pettigrew, I believe. Hetty Pettigrew. She modeled for Whistler as well as for Roussel. And to me, it's interesting because, and Whistler was the senior figure of the two, because Whistler was really kind of known for not really being very comfortable with painting the nude. There are a few nudes by him, but not very many, and they're not very good. That's it's a thing that he had a particular weakness about. There are better watercolors and so on that he did of nudes, but oil paintings, no. So, I have this idea somehow that the kimono is what she would have been wearing to pose for Whistler. And now she's on her break, and she's reading the newspaper to pass the time on her break. But of course, the idea that it's a break, if that's what it is a fiction, because she's not taking a break. She's posing for Roussel, with whom, by the way, I don't know if she had it. Then eventually she had a relationship with, and they had a daughter together. So one of the things that interests me about the painting is this fact that the subject of a model as a model was something fairly new in 19th century painting. In other words, painters depended on models in the past, but in painting them, they turned them into something else. They turned them into Mary, they turned them into a mythological figure, an allegorical figure. The model as a working person just doing a job in a studio, and the studio is just a literal artist's studio, is something that was a new subject in 19th century art. And it was a realism, but it's a fictive realism because somehow there's this pretense that he's catching her off hours, but she's actually on her working hours.
Also, the things he's used to construct in this painting, they're quite contemporary, aren't they? Like you've mentioned, the kimono being very, in vogue of that moment. The chair is quite contemporary. She's reading a magazine, which obviously was quite a new thing at the time. So these are very much saying this is a moment, a very up-to-date painting of that time. So
it's not allegorical.
No,
it's not. Absolutely,
yeah. So that capturing that moment of time of the model on her break.
But there's an allegory in a different sense, but it's an allegory about your topic, absorption, and what's the relationship between her absorption in I think it's newspaper, or you think it's a magazine, whatever it is, and a viewer's absorption in the painting. And what is it that you're being absorbed into when you're absorbed into the painting? Are you being absorbed into the sight of a girl with her clothes off? Are you, absorbed into a painting? What is it?
Absolutely. It keeps that play, definitely. Yeah. But I think we'll look at absorption a bit later on as well.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's one of those paintings that definitely plays with you in that respect.
Claire, can we come to you, and perhaps if you can tell us something about the kinship between this Francis Bacon painting that you chose and your own practice?
When I sorry. I chose the Bacon because I've got a real problem with him. I think. I feel like I've got to fight through all these facts before I can actually look at the painting. I think it works in the same way as looking at Damien Hirst. You know, I can't look at his work without knowing about him and without knowing about the persona. And I think Bacon's actually an artist that most people have an understanding of on one level, or know work, or know about him. He's in our national psyche, I think, in some way. And for me, this is why he's always been on the back burner. He's always been an artist that I thought I knew a lot about, but I don't. You know, I just think, oh yeah, I know about him. That's fine. Don't need to deal with that. So when you asked me to choose a painting, this is why I chose this painting predominantly. I started looking at Bacon again in 2010 when I was working on, I was planning works for Hepworth show at Hepworth Wakefield, and I was planning 5 really large-scale pieces, and one painting I wanted it to be pink, and I've always had a real problem with pink, and it's a colour that I've kind of tried to stay away from. I just don't know how to use it. Actually, physically, every time I use it, it just doesn't do what I want it to do. So I started looking at Bacon and looking at his colours, really. That was it. It was that simple. It was like, I want to use pink. He's used pink. He uses pink really well, so I can use pink. And that was really why I went back to looking at him. And I think Bacon is actually an amazing colourist, and I don't think that's something he's actually that well known for.
I've heard him being described as a dramatist more than a colourist.
See, I really think he's great. His colours are great. So I was looking at his use of pink, but then that introduced me to orange, and looking at the orange used on the figures at the base of the crucifixion, and how it's so complex. It's like umber, ochre, brown, yellow, black. It's not one block colour.
It's not a one-shot kind of thing.
But we're so used to seeing Bacon in reproduction that those colours always reproduce as block colours. So the pink's a block colour, the orange block colour, the blue's block colour. And it's when you actually get very close and you can see this layering of colour. And I was like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm nicking this. But it wasn't that simple, because at that point I was using enamel. The painting was 10 metres long. I was working with house paint enamel, really, really not nice material, very opaque, very solid, very on or off. There's no layering. So I was getting very frustrated and very angry with the whole thing. And that's when I thought I need to change my material.
This was the switch then?
Yeah, so it was really major. You know, I was in the middle of making this exhibition for the Hepworth, and I just thought, I'm going to start using oil. And I've never used oil before, so it was a stupid thing to do, but also I couldn't go back once I realised what I needed to do to move the... and that was really quite an important point for me, and that's when the work really, really changed. But, oh, can we have the Bacon painting back?
Yeah.
Because, like you're saying, when you look at his work, for me, when I look at his work, it's really easy to decode the clues. You know, you look at the painting, the broken glasses, the open mouth, the smart shirt, the tie, the blind cord, you know, the horizontal pink pole in the background with the curtains hanging down, the shadow in the right-hand corner. But all of these are just clues, and I just wish I didn't know about them in a way. I wish I could just look at the painting, because I took my children upstairs to see it earlier, and my little girl said, is that a man or a woman, and why are they so angry? And I was like, oh, I wish I could just look at it like that without any of these other contexts. And my son said, why has he got his head in a box? And I was just like, that is just brilliant, isn't it? I would really love to be able to look at this painting like this. So, you know, if we really, the curtain pole can act as a horizon, and I was trying to discuss with that gives you a horizon, you're setting it into a landscape, the morphing of the nurse and the nurse and the businessman, you're getting this sexless kind of figure. I was talking about the suit and the shirt, and the fact that Bacon was actually very dapper and very well known for shopping in Mayfair in Paris, and all those kind of things. And they were asking about, what else? And I'm saying, well, there's a shadow in the corner, and that could show that someone's watching, or it might be the shadow of the artist making the painting. But this is endless. You can endlessly do this with Bacon, and that's what really annoys me about the work. I don't want those connections all the time. I just want to be able to look at the paint and the structure of the painting. So I don't know if knowing all of this about Bacon actually adds to the painting. And you're talking about document, you're talking about painting as document. And I don't know what role, so I've written that I don't know what role this has, this historical document, or what way does it preserve or record historical content, because the multi-layering of time and the addition of history adds contemporary meaning. I never see painting as a static, as something that's stopped in another time. It's always added to. We're always looking at it in the contemporary, aren't we? So, and I don't really want to solidify its meaning, and I think it can mature with age, and it gains a lot more.
It's elusive in a different way to the Roussel painting.
Yeah.
It's kind of tricky to grasp it. It's complicated.
But I think with Bacon there's always these clues or these signifiers and the subject material, and you can decode every bit of it like you're reading a novel, and I don't like looking at painting like that. I don't want to look at painting like that. I don't need to know too much detail about the original photographic source material. I don't want to, you know. I don't want to know that.
You like the ambiguous quality.
Yeah. I can really appreciate the way he combines like, disparate images from different times. The anxiety and tension in this painting is from this collection of imagery that he's brought together, and I am interested in the fact that he said that Poussin's representation of the screaming woman in the Massacre of the Innocents was the best screaming art, and he really wanted to try and reproduce that, and he kept on painting these screaming mouths but could never quite get
because
that.
There's that whole idea about, you know, why was it the mouth that was such an attractive thing to him?
Again, and like they know in his studio that he had a book of graphic medical illustrations of mouth diseases, which is fine. That's all I need to know. I don't need to know that, you know, as a young man he had mouth operations and throat operations. I think that's the problem with Bacon. It's all too much. We know too much. Right. Yeah. So we start reading the work how you may read a book. You start pacing all these bits together.
What you want it to be, rather
and the art detective way of looking at art, I don't find that interesting, really. I think it closes down the full experience, and I think it limits the access. And once you start trying to logically understand a painting, for me, I go, okay, on to the next one.
For Bacon, it was all about painting experience, wasn't it?
The shutters kind of come down and it's finished. I don't think painting's that straightforward, and I think as a painter, I never really understand my work. Maybe it might be a year after or 2 years after, and there's things that I've made that I still don't get. But there's a linear progression that you make something, and from that you make the next piece. So this is kind of how it moves. So that's what I was going to say. It's more that sort of morphing of the subject matter and the way it's actually painted, and the size of the canvas and the choice of material. I think when that comes together, it's that bit of magic that actually does its thing, and that's what I'm interested in. I think at that point.
That there's actually coming to surface. That's what I think we're going to look at next.
I mean, I was just thinking, Barry, in terms of this idea, can you read a surface, or what can you read through the surface? And thinking about Roussel's painting. I did find this quote in Barry's recent book, Words for Art, on a chapter called A Benjamin View of Colour. And you talk about how Walter Benjamin would talk about perception as a form of reading, almost like soothsaying. And I kind of was trying to think of how, in terms of looking at, I guess, very, very different to Bacon's painting, which is quite gritty and guttural and kind of gives you it's full of sand, and there's sand in the surface, under the surface, sprinkled on top of the surface. Roussel, it's almost devoid of brush strokes. It's almost completely flat. And I was just thinking about how that might sort of channel how we might read what you have been talking about within the painting, to see interest in I guess, Japanese art, and how much artifice there is in this painting, or if there isn't.
Yeah. I'm not sure if the kind of paint skin of the painting is really as smooth as all that. It's very hard to tell because it's hung so high up. You can't really get a good close look at it. I suspect it may be a little bit less than it seems, but true again, especially if you kind of compare it with Whistler as his supposed influence. It's not nebulous the way Whistler usually is. He brings it back more toward a kind of classical, almost David-esque kind of
Quality.
solidity.
Yeah.
But the lines, the edges of forms are still rather soft, you know, and so I'm not sure it's as smooth as all that, but you're made very aware of the smoothness of the body that's being described, and then actually, in a way, surprisingly like the bacon, the sort of the intangibility of the dark background.
But the fabric in this and the fabric in the bacon on the curtain, it's so, like almost with the fact of the bacon, it's almost like the brush mark. You can, there's an energy in the way that it's.
This is so far more controlled, isn't it? It's much more
This is like
quite
creative,
poetic.
isn't it?
Yes, yeah. Less violent, aggressive.
Sure, yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, talking about bacon's surface, you mentioned the sand earlier. There's a part where you can actually see that it looks like pure sand. It doesn't look, there's a bit where it looks like it's mixed in.
I think it's mixed in and then it's also thrown on.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. There's a thrown quality, kind of quite instant, and it tends to capture a sort of exploratory, instant, very quick.
But it's a
But
blurring. It has does a.
But isn't that, you know, the funny thing is with bacon, there's something a little bit at odds with the drawing in that. It's as if he feels that his drawing is too stiff and too
good.
Yeah, and so therefore he's got to try and kind
it's
of
breaking out from it.
mess it up, and he
it's-
doesn't quite succeed actually.
It's like regaling against that
It's
control.
like it's anti-painting almost, isn't it? Well, I don't know, but my worst nightmare would be someone's chuck a load of sand on my paint and go mental. Right? You know, trying to stop any dust, dead flies, anything, and then suddenly there's like, it's almost like detaching himself from the surface. So it's, you know, it's a bit of a
it's kind of like I've got too precious. Do
Yeah.
I kind of remove myself from it by?
Well, it also blurs as well. It blurs all the lines, doesn't it? It's like, you know, you're rubbing it in.
Definitely, and actually that blurring of boundaries brings to the other Bacon triptych, because there's like a connection between we think between the Roussel painting and the Bacon painting, and it's in the Roussel painting there's this big pink swathe of the kimono that is the bit where the kimono surface of the paint is very flat, and then it starts to become impasto and quite gestural, Bacon-like in a way. And then if you look at this particular triptych, which is the 1972 one, you can see these similar pink swathes of flesh-like dangling masses where the body seems to be escaping its boundaries, unravelling. And it's kind of, was Roussel, you know, is Bacon using kind of Roussel's use of material in a similar way? Is he kind of exploring the boundaries of the body? Because if you look at, can we go back to the Roussel? It works also as a framing mechanism. It sort of has a triangular effect between the legs, the side of the chair, and it's that point where the end of the kimono, the end of the turquoise, then turns into the rest of the kimono, this pink.
But when you see
that's the impasto part. That's
but
really,
it's actually much more loosely painted.
It is, yes.
So it's almost
Wet on
when I
wet,
see that,
kind
I
of.
think you've got a very flat painting, but suddenly you've got the connection to the artist, because the artist is almost at the end of that little bit of fabric,
yeah.
And then it just flattens out as you go through.
It also then kind of creates the distance between himself and her. You know, puts her into the middle ground. His direct relationship, as you say, is kind of with that material.
Yeah.
And, you know, whatever the status of their relationship was at this time, as he's showing it here, he's, you know, showing it at a kind of, he's not getting into her space, he's not...
But there is still a link, isn't there?
Yeah, I see it almost as a pathway in. I mean, it might be just for the beholder or the spectator of the painting. Maybe it's kind of a diminishing link, like you said, between him and her. But it is definitely some sort of chord, isn't it? Kind of.
Well, yeah, it depends on which direction you see.
Yeah.
You see the thing going. Sure.
But like you mentioned earlier about the absorption, sort of this 18th century French concept that if the subject of the painting is totally engrossed in whatever they're undergoing, whether that be a reading process or whatever, that's meant to encourage the absorption of us, the painter, the beholder of the painting. Whereas we could say, can we go back to Bacon, that Bacon is almost like the complete antithesis of this. I don't know if you've seen the painting, but has quite a gaudy, Liberace-esque type frame, very stage-like. Obviously has the glass in front of the painting, so that creates this kind of distancing that we are then reflected in as the beholder. But it kind of addresses us in a very mannered way and theatrical way that's meant to kind of, does it shock us? Does it absorb us in the same way that the Roussel does? What do you think that Bacon has that theatrical quality to his work?
Well, I think definitely, because it's for quite a small painting, it's quite confrontational.
Yeah.
But again, it's getting through that persona, his own theatrical kind of persona, and the way that he's constructed how people see him, and like his denial of other artists, and there's so much there, isn't there, that you have to get through before you can really look at the painting. But yeah, I think it's totally theatrical, the way it's set up, the stage. And we're talking about this space frame thing, which was
the box,
why has he got a head in a box? This first appeared in Bacon's work in 1949, so this was still really early use of the motif, but this is quite an unusual one because usually they're either white or black and they're very geometric, whereas this is made up of red, white and blue. When you can't really see it so much on this, but when you actually see the real painting, it's very prominent. And the way the line sits on the head puts me in mind of some kind of medical brace, so back to this whole mouth thing,
keep straight.
or a like a helmet. And it was made in 1952, so then you'll start thinking about post-war anxiety. And you knew that Henry Moore and Sidney Nolan were both painting and sculpting helmets at that time. It was quite although Bacon was looking at Sidney Nolan, he was like total denial that he wasn't. I wasn't really.
He's an island.
Exactly. So both artists were very familiar to Bacon at that time, and they were all looking at this helmet thing. So the space frame cage, architectural grid, I don't know, people call it lots of different things.
He talks about it as a cropping motif, doesn't he?
Yeah, well, in discussions with David Sylvester, he was saying that Bacon should crop as close as he can to space frames or cages or whatever. But for me, I think you need the space on the outside to intensify the space on the inside.
Yeah.
So that in this, it intensifies the face and that kind of anxiety within the face. So it almost does put the head into another place. I think by cropping it, it just wouldn't do the same thing. But I've been using these containments, but I was coming to it from Giacometti, so I was looking at...
Giacometti.
I was looking... Well, the sculpture...
Sculpture first.
The nose, really, was the first sculpture that I saw, and, thinking about when you make a sculpture... So I've looked at sculpture a lot, I studied sculpture, and I started painting other people's sculpture recently. So when you look at something like this, that has to work, the string has to be in the right place, the length of the nose has to be correct to balance the sculpture. But in painting, you can kind of get away with that. You can do what you want, and you can make it look like something's hanging. You can make something look heavy, but it doesn't have to work. So I was walking around the Villa de Barlo and thinking, that has to work. Otherwise it's going to fall over, isn't it? So it's really great. In painting, you can do that without all the extras. So it was just something else about Bacon that had kind of come back into my own practice, which surprised me, really.
I was sort of thinking about this, I guess, for both Barry and Claire, in terms of like absorption, thinking about absorption within the two paintings, and perhaps furthering or continuing on from that, the idea of the gaze in painting. And I was reading an interview from you, Claire, I think it was back in 2001, and you talked about when you used to when you used to use gloss paint.
Yeah.
That was just really beautiful to see the room that it's in, and then when you get closer and closer, the room disappears and you appear. I thought that was quite...
Also, that was about denial as well, because I'd come from sculpture, and with gloss and enamel, there's no brush mark, there's no hint of the artist. I worked flat on aluminium. It was very much I was making an object, although I still feel a little bit like that now. That shift in scale, I'm working in a much more intimate scale, and working with oil, it's changed my relationship. I actually feel like I'm almost a painter. You know, I've kind of gone through my apprenticeship now, and I'm almost.
But that switch, like we kind of briefly touched on earlier, a lot of it had to do with some of Bacon's oranges and some of his.
Totally. It was
something you couldn't achieve in the
pink
gloss.
in that triptych, wasn't it?
Well, it was the other triptych.
Oh,
It was with a fully pink bottom.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I was also.
I was going to say the Lazy Husband picture.
Yeah.
So did you explore kind of what you were talking about there? You can get away with lots of things in paint that you can't in sculpture.
Yeah. So I wanted this head, and I just wanted to be confused, and painting background as foreground and mixing things in, and later on the oddcraft and white holes, which are essentially still lives. They're hairs hanging within a grid or being hung up by one leg, and it's trying to get that weight into the painting, but so that the body of the hair is actually just a background brush mark. It's not. It's not. So the foreground, background, you can really mess with that, and you suddenly put a line into something, and you change the way people.
Opticality plays with that.
Totally. So it's been really useful.
So you're a sculptor that uses paint.
Yeah, I'm a frustrated sculptor.
Barry, sorry, can I return to this idea of the gaze within Roussel's painting, and I guess absorption in terms of when we look at it, are we looking at someone who is absorbed in, I guess they're absorbed in looking at an image, you could say, or this sort of, I almost get this feeling of sort of the, there's a sort of a ping pong. We're looking at her and she's disinterested. She's looking down at the image, and are we kind of almost empathizing with her looking at this magazine, at this image? Is this something that at all been thinking about?
I think that there's a sense, and it's something in her, the set of her eyes, that you would be irritating her if you bugged her while she was trying to read whatever it is that she's reading. So there's the absorption that exists there, exists in relationship to also a resistance to being taken out of the absorption, which means, of course, it's not a complete absorption. It's a kind of a divided consciousness. There's this, this sense around the edges of the absorption that there's someone around who can, disrupt it.
Yeah.
I think when looking at that painting, I just think she's really uncomfortable. She's got very weathered hands, weathered face. She doesn't look like she's used to. I know you said she's a model. She doesn't look like she's used to sitting around naked and reading. I don't know, can she read? It's almost like it's just, I don't know. It feels very awkward to me. It doesn't feel comfortable at all.
Yeah, there's, to get your
right
chin
down
on your chest, there's quite an uncomfortable posture. And
it's almost like she's holding her breath.
Yeah,
Kind of.
and slightly closed off.
But her hands are just so weird with the rest of her body and her face. It's
the
all,
dirty hand.
well, weathered, I think, like suntanned and tanned face. And
We played with the idea that she'd been drawing with charcoal, didn't we?
she's been out doing the gardening.
But you'd zoomed in on that particular.
Yeah, it's quite difficult to see because it is about 8 feet high, and I tried to zoom in and see what exactly she was looking at, and it looked like a text. But if you flip it, we've got
And how well that
it's very
portrays.
pixelated there. It does look like something like a bridge, or it's definitely an image. But I feel it does change it from maybe the sheet on the right is text, but this is definitely an image. It's very. I thought I had kind of clicked something. I thought it was a whistler, and I was getting all excited, but it's not. It's definitely not. I thought it was one of the nocturnes. And I was like, oh, that's it. But it does sort of shifted slightly for me.
It's like we're looking at somebody. We're looking at a painting. Somebody possibly looking at a painting. It kind of makes you think of the infinity type.
I don't know. I think I wish we could have the painting right in front of us so we can see. I'm a little bit skeptical of reading in the idea that it's an image. To me, all you can see is that there's a kind of gray that stands for the block of text. But but there's no proving that as far as I can,
Yeah.
you know, so you
No.
could be right. Yeah.
It could be, you know, a magazine at the time. It could have been a catalogue for a painting show. Who knows? It'd be nice to kind of play along with that idea. But
Yeah.
or it could be the early idea of photography, and because
Yeah.
we were thinking about how photographs are used in work.
Yeah, and this painting was, I mean, it was coming, I mean, one of the, I guess, handheld cameras were just sort of, this Kodak was just sort of coming at the time, so it's, and it does have that kind of photographicness to it. I was actually going to ask you, Claire, if you could tell us something about your relationship to the photograph. I thought it was quite beautiful, again, and Barry, what you wrote about Claire's use of the photograph before in the catalogue, about it's almost like it's a kind of a loose way of using the photograph. It's not transcribing it. It's,
Well, I couldn't make my work without photography. So,
yeah.
but again, I need this distance with the photograph. So for a long time, like this was this Hepworth period was a massive change for me. Everything kind of fell apart and changed.
How did you switch actually from you were working with you might call it undergrowth or like photographing at night?
Yeah, well, it was always so. I don't know, 10 years ago I started photographing rocks but couldn't work out how to paint them, and I had to sort of catch up with how I could paint them. So it was always about being in a landscape, photographing the landscape and experience it visually, colour-wise, firsthand, and then taking those images away and constructing them to create something that looks maybe not like a landscape. But
Why nighttime?
it wasn't just night. It used to be at night time.
Right.
And
Started off at night.
It started off at, like 20 years ago, it was like going into a landscape with a flash, taking the photograph and then seeing what you ended up with. So you had no control over what you were photographing.
right.
And then it became a lot more controlled. And then it just got to a point where the practice was very much painting and subject matter and the process of painting and the subject matter. And it just wasn't what I wanted to do. It wasn't working. So over the last 3 years, there's been a massive change in my relationship to the subject photograph. So now I'm mostly using found imagery. I'm mostly using black and white imagery.
Why is that? Why?
Because it just gives me so much, it just gives me a distance I don't have. So it's enabling me to bring the photograph and the painting a lot closer, so it's a lot more morphing, so it feels more complete. I can't sort of break it down so much.
And is colour invented then, or is
the colour? So I choose the photograph that I want to work with, or the selection of photographs, and I collage them together really roughly, and just chopping bits up and sticking them together, and then I draw that, and that's projected onto the aluminium, and then I cut, so the whole surface is covered in masking tape. So essentially, you've got a drawn stencil, and then it's just a way of navigating the paint, so you can take the tape off and you can make the paint do this, or you can kind of navigate.
Because I even from like seeing a film of you working, I still find it tricky to kind of figure out how is this done.
You don't need to know.
You describe it as a very physical process.
Oh, it is, but it's like
Yeah.
making sculpture, and I work flat, and I never lift them up until they're finished. And then, so you can, so the background on this painting would have been painted first, and then there's little cutouts where the background comes into the foreground. So,
And they're all on aluminium, aren't they? 'Cause
yeah, they're
big-
all in aluminium.
yeah.
No, not so big.
Oh, right, so it's
These aren't big. This is 1.5 meters, and if you go to the newer one, the next one, that's quite small. And there's a lot more blurring of so where you can't see on that screen actually, but where the grey hits the sort of red, that was a taped line, and then I decided I'd take the line off and start working wet on wet. So there's lots changing, but when I'm actually painting, all I'm really thinking about is colour and the brush mark, because all the other stuff's been taken care of in the photographing stage, or in the finding the photograph, in the drawing.
Yeah. So when you're selecting photographs, it doesn't necessarily need to be, say, a good photograph for you. It's
not at
thinking
all.
this will look good.
Not at all. And you don't really need, there's reasons that I choose photographs in the way I suppose Bacon was looking at his mouth photographs or Nazi propaganda or whatever he was looking at. But I don't need people to know what I'm looking at to look at the painting. I don't think it's important. That's what needs to stop.
Do you think it was important for Bacon, or did he kind
I
of...
don't know. That's what I don't want it to be. No, I just want to think he was a great surrealist, and he brought all these images together, and he stuck them together, and he made
I
these
tend to think
fantastic-
he would just take whatever
I don't think
suggested something to him. And there's a very interesting exhibition now, by the way, in New York, which relates to this because it's a show of new paintings, well, 2 paintings and many drawings and prints by Jasper Johns, and it's at the MoMA. And basically, he found a photograph that John Deacon had taken for Bacon of Lucian Freud as preparation for a portrait he was going to do. And he saw it in an auction catalog because the painting was up for auction. And the photograph itself is all like crumpled up and torn, and he derives all this work from this image and kind of transcribing it and making it to a linear pattern and mirroring it. And he makes a skull come out of this cracks on the wall, you know, and all this stuff. And it's like, has nothing to do with anything to do with Francis Bacon, Lucian Freud, John Deacon, or any of it. But it was just like he found this thing. He thought, oh, that's a kind of used thing that I can reuse.
But isn't that where the role of the artist is? You're making those decisions. You're making those decisions. And most of the time you don't know why. I don't know why sometimes now when I go, well, that picture of a cuckoo and that big pile of newspaper and that Henry Moorhead, God, they're brilliant. They all work together. I'm going to use them. I don't know why. It's very base. It's very... And I'd like to know why. I'd like to understand it more. But at the moment, it's very much...
Kind of exploring and breaking the boundaries of that materiality through the photo and the tearing up and the...
But you think Sutherland, you know, he had an Italian photographer that used to take all his photographs for him that he used to paint from. I think Sickert used to tear things out of theatre catalogues, didn't he? And, you know, I think
it's like
it's been going a long time.
Yeah, I mean, Bacon liked the Muybridge photographs, didn't he? Kind of liked them as a starting point. But you can really see where he kind of tore away the boundaries of the bodies and kind of unravelled
So I don't
them.
think his subject matter was necessarily important, the source of the subject or the
starting point.
Yeah, I think it's just, he saw things. I think he was like a sponge. He saw things, he knew what he wanted, and he took them. It didn't really matter. And I think that's why now historians really looking into Bacon and reading Bacon, I think you can read too much sometimes into...
I thought it was quite interesting how he preferred to work from a 2D surface, that, you know, rather than
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he didn't like to be in the room with a model or anything like that. He preferred
I see what you mean.
Yeah, use an image or a found image rather than through observation.
Oh yeah, I couldn't work with a three-dimensional.
No, but that's good. It's kind of like twists the sculpture painting thing on the head, doesn't it? Kind of.
But at the moment, I'm painting paintings of from photographs of other people's sculpture that mostly off the internet or out of an old book or something. So it's always black and white. It's really...
You've really kind of forgone that. You know it's 3D, but you're pushing it to the 2D, but describing
But then
the 2D.
reconstructing it, trying to think, you know, if you've got a Phila de Barlow wrapped piece, or you've got a Louise Bourgeois sewn piece, or you've got a Palozzi with the wax that's constructed ahead, you know, thinking about how you'd actually make that and thinking about that in paint, that's kind of... It's that basic.
It's interesting where you we were talking earlier about how, you know, Bacon kind of self-edited to a degree, but he did mention a few times, and to David Sylvester, about how he was interested in Degas, and in terms of, I might just bring up, there should be a Degas painting at the end. He talked about, but I just thought this was quite sort of, there was a parallel here with maybe the curtains within the Bacon piece that you selected. But he talks about he quite liked how it almost works like a shuttering. And I think there's something where I'm going to quote from here where he says, he likes where the sensation doesn't come straight out at you, but slides out slowly and gently through the gaps. And I'm just thinking about the way that you sort of seem to distill these photographs. You know, it's almost, you can slightly tell with Hepworth works that they are rocks, but it's hard to tell how enormous they might be, or even there's something sort of, you kind of take an ownership or something of the photograph through.
I think in the past, I think now it's very different because the heads are very much about the head shape, and a lot of people know the sculptures, whatever. But before, it was about not knowing a scale of something or how. It could be something very tiny under a microscope, or it could be a huge landscape or a vista. So, it's I don't think it can work in those two ways.
Yeah.
If we go back to the Roussel, there's one thing we haven't, I suppose, addressed yet was obviously the gaze. That was something, Donald, that as us, as the spectator, the beholder looking in, we see this very closed-off person. She's kind of, she's very shut off to us, and we're looking in. How do you think Theodore Roussel is kind of addressing us as the beholder in that respect?
Well, I think we've kind of spoken to that a bit, maybe not exactly in terms of the gaze, but even in our disagreement about whether that fabric is a kind of line out to us or a separation from us. And I think that the main thing is that there's a real kind of, whatever it is, there's a real kind of discomfort, which is partly a sense of her discomfort, but I think we have to think that it's a discomfort with the presence of the beholder.
Right.
Whether, that's Redback as Roussel, the empirically existing painter who's there in the room with her, or, a subsequent beholder looking at the painting.
Because it's likened to the Olympia, isn't it? We have the Olympia.
Well, yeah, it does. It definitely does. There is sort of that sort of lineage that perhaps, well, the Olympia is kind of almost the opposite. You're being confronted by the gaze, I'd say, without stressing the point. But then it definitely, it's flipped that on its head. She's completely passive in the Roussel. It's quite a different, quite a different setup, I think. Sure.
And of course, the overtly indicated line of work is quite different in the case of Olympia.
Yes. Although I suppose that, obviously becoming a partner of Roussel, kind of those boundaries blur.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, obviously there's kind of quite a brazen outlook here of this addressing, you're looking at me, whereas obviously the Theodore has kind of produced this kind of very quiet, removed quality.
It's a lot more contemplative or something like that.
Yes. And then on the opposite, I suppose, with Bacon, we've got the aggressive shouting, screaming out at us. So it's interesting how the two paintings that you didn't know anything about compared to your choices, this is how those two are pivotal on those particular points. Actually, on that point, that's where I think we ought to bring this little discussion to an end here. I think we've covered quite a few different areas that we maybe might not have considered earlier, but I think it's a very strong point is to think about how we use paintings like this today, how we revisit them, and how we think about them in relation to practice, whether that practice is a writing practice, a research practice, or even a painterly practice. So to our audience, I think we ought to open some questions out to them. I think we've got some microphones around, but if you do have questions, we'd like you to keep them short and concise and beautiful, obviously. And if you could speak into the microphone so we can all hear you. So, are there any questions out there? Oh, there's a lady right at the back.
Thank you for the talk. Is this on? What do you think about the possibility of the painting of the girl reading being simply a commercial painting, where the theme of the reading girl is an excuse, so to speak, to create a painting that is quote-unquote decent, but still allows the viewer the possibility of simply admiring the female body. Also, the idea that if the girl is focusing on the text or the picture or whatever the journal may be, perhaps that's an opportunity for the viewer also to become perhaps a voyeur into this, into this scene. And at the same time, it was a really it was a really interesting comment that it does describe the time that it was painted in quite well in terms of the magazine being a new thing, so it gives it a contemporary feeling, and the kimono being kind of thing that is in fashion. So perhaps, what do you think about the possibility of the painting being a contemporary, fashionable opportunity to sell a painting?
I mean, I think it's the general idea that one is painting in order to provide a pleasurable experience for somebody. It's a pretty generic kind of comment to make. I mean, in terms of commercialism, I mean, we can't read ourselves back in time to his situation with respect to the market. so I think we have to just take it in terms of his own interest. And so you don't have to think that, well, he thought, oh, other people are interested in looking at naked girls, so I'll paint one. He just had to think he was interested in looking at one, right? And of course, from the critical response that Alison read, if it was calculated to, to kind of please an audience, it wasn't entirely successful because it was actually criticized as something indecent and destructive of art by some critics at the time. Other people admired it. But what I can say is if we were to go back and look at all the girl reading paintings that were in the Google image search, very few of them nude, but there were some, but many pictures of girls reading. They're all tend to be very kind of, as I put it, fluffy, kind of overtly pleasing, somewhat seductive in one way or another. If you, what can I say? I mean, there's nothing about her that is shown to be kind of simpering or, using her wiles on a viewer. Neither, of course, is she confrontational like the Olympia, who, is like facing the viewer who stands for the client who's just walked in, and she's basically saying, "Have you got the money?" or something like that. Let's get down to business. But
then also she's not an academic, is she? She's not sort of. It looks like it's a part of leisure rather than.
Well, but it's not the leisure of a lady of leisure. It's the leisure of a working person.
Yeah.
And that's a different situation. Again, in all those Google image search paintings of girls reading, they seem to be mostly kind of, well-to-do, young people and so on, and kind of well brought up and doing proper things. She's in a different situation, and it's more ambiguous, and I think it's just a little bit too uncomfortable to be purely concocted in order to aim to please.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I was just looking for your viewpoint on that.
Do we have some other questions? We have a gentleman down here.
Are we all... Is it working? Yes.
We can hear you.
Yeah. Are we also post-feminists now that we are comfortable to look at this picture without a feminist critique of the nude, and that we're quite happy to call fully grown women girls and constantly refer to them as girls rather than as women?
Well, do we know how old she is?
We could find out, but I don't know.
I don't know.
No idea.
No.
Not sure exactly.
No, I'm sorry, we're not sure how old she was. So, do we feel comfortable with this?
Yeah, I feel comfortable taking the title of the painting as the title
As a girl.
of the painting as the given, and if she doesn't look like, if I saw her as being matronly and being called a girl by the title of the painting, I'd be interested in interpreting that, but
she looks quite youthful, doesn't she? Yes.
But yeah, I mean the word girl as being used.
She's a woman.
Hmm?
She's a woman. She's got breasts. I think she's a woman. I don't think it's a case of being youthful or not. I agree.
Okay, but then all you can say is that well, you disagree with Roussel, and he was but he was a 19th.
I did have a moment when we were sorry.
If you just wait for the microphones.
So can you hear?
Thank you.
Sorry.
I did have a moment where I suddenly had an out-of-body experience, and I thought we're all just talking about this as a painting, and nobody has talked about nudity, and nobody has talked about the male gaze or the woman or anything like that. So I did.
I think we've talked about a lot of that. Maybe you weren't quite listening, but yeah, I think that you have to take as given that a person making a painting, or indeed a person who is the subject of a painting is a product of their time, and I mean, of course you can say all kinds of things about how we might be different in our time, and maybe we'd like to be even more different than we are from the points of view that were current at that time. And that's part of your kind of document theme, I suppose. But personally, I don't feel I need to belabor that in every context. I don't have to make a critique of the nude every time I see a nude, because I wouldn't, you know, if I walked around any museum, I wouldn't be able to get to any other thought other than the critique of the nude, because there are a lot of nudes to, you know, that you could make the same critique of.
Maybe he's using the nude in that very strong way, and in empowering kind of situation, possibly.
Yeah, I was just going to point out, though, it depends on how the nude is pictured, and there's a very big difference between Manet's Olympia and the nude in this painting. In Manet's Olympia, there are many other interests going on pictorially in terms of the balance of the gaze and the body and so on, which give it the nude a very different role in the painting, whereas this looks like soft porn. So I think it depends, to me anyway. So I think it's not about whether or not you should critique the nude in principle, but how the nude is actually figured in the painting is very different from the literal fact of the nude.
Would you find looking at it today quite problematic?
Yeah, do I?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't like the painting. I wouldn't have chosen it, and I can't understand why you chose it, to be honest. But that's a personal thing, obviously. But I think I think to say that you don't have to talk about the nude is to generalise about painting. It's to say, and I'm just pointing out in this painting, the nude is figured in a very particular way.
So maybe that's, you know, the hard point, you know, painting as a document. That's exactly, you know, what this painting is doing. It's documenting a particular moment in time of how that probably that changing idea of how the nude was viewed. You know, like we look at the Spectator quote, I suppose it's just another example of that shifting sensibility of how we today would view this painting. So in that respect, it has every validity to be looked at as a reflection of that time.
Sure. I just don't understand what's meant by saying nobody talked about the nude when it's been talked about a lot. It just wasn't talked about in the way one might have wanted to hear it talked about.
We have so little time, don't we, that there's so many areas that we could cover. Sorry, yes, we have another question.
I just thought it would be interesting to open up the discussion about this painting being of a nude into the fact that both paintings selected were of figures, and how those decisions were made from the basis of looking at paintings as a document. Were you both more inclined to look at how other people are being depicted in paintings and how that's seen as a document of ourselves or the human condition?
We can start from the Bacon point.
Well, I chose Bacon because, like I said, I think generally as an artist, I think he's in our national psyche. I think most people know who he is, but I don't. I thought I knew who he was. I don't know who he is at all, and I don't know that much about his work. And I've been quite surprised how his work has had an effect on me when I've looked at it in a very basic material and structure way. It's nothing more than that. It's like colour and form, and that's why I chose it. To be truthful, it wasn't really much to do with the figure. It was about the pink pole and the grid on top of the head. Those are the two things that I'm thinking when I look at that painting. But that's because it's in relationship very practically to my own practice. Sorry, can't give you any more than that. It wasn't about the figure. It wasn't.
But if it is to be thought of as a complex document, there's a very specific, almost corner of that sort of works for you with your practice. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's literally things that other artists that I've been looking at, and things that I've wanted to kind of understand and look at in other paintings. So the fact that it's a figure, whether it's a male or female figure, which is still, Bacon does this thing where he morphs male and female figures together, and you're not really sure what. Well, I'm not sure. I know he's wearing a suit, but can't definitely say it's a man. It's not really in my area of interest, I'm afraid. It's not something that, it's just there, it's in the painting, but I like the grid and the pole in the background.
You know, I mean, Bacon is a figurative painter in a different sense than someone like Roussel, because the figure for him is a construction, it's a composite, and it doesn't refer to a single kind of empirical reality. Whereas
it's a sense of thing. Yeah.
Whereas for Roussel, there is, you know, in the 19th century sense, there's a realism involved, and it's a painting of a particular person in a particular situation at a particular time. And so therefore the kind of concreteness of the figure has a different valency.
It's a much more contained figure, whereas Bacon
But it's
seems
a
to be
complete
breaking
figure.
out.
You can see this isn't even, like you've got almost got one head, so above the glasses you've got one forehead, then you've got another forehead. You're very aware that, and the same with the chin, it's a construct of images
Movement
that have been...
When you see the battleship, like the image that's
Like it's
supposed
got a
to be
very
that they
short
come
forehead,
from.
and that's
Yeah, it's quite... it almost kind of ruins it for me slightly when I see it like that, but I find
Exactly.
I find it's like that
You
I
shouldn't
can
be seeing the
I
figure.
find I can kind of forget that in a way when you're in front of it and you're kind of confronted with it.
I find it very easy to break down a painting, and I don't usually look at the whole thing. I just take out the bits that I'm interested in. And I know maybe that's not a great way to look at painting, but that's... So at the moment, the figure's not something that interests me. It's the structure of the painting and the grid, and I can kind of take that away from that without really dealing with the figure. But
any other questions?
Lots.
Oh, God.
Hi, it's just interesting hearing Claire talk about when you're working on the painting, you're working on it flat, and you're looking just at the brushstroke and the colours. And you said that all of the subject matter is kind of taken care of in advance, and how you're looking at Bacon, you're looking at him in the same way. Is that how you want us to look at your paintings, to start from looking at them almost as abstract, and the subject matter is really quite secondary, so something like the white hairs, the
subject matter is not important. I try not to show the subject matter or to let people see source photography or drawings or whatever. I hope people do see the painting as a whole, but if they break it down, they break it down. But they don't need to. I think some of my work balances between abstraction and figuration. It sits somewhere in something that's real. It's sort of based in something that's real, but it doesn't always necessarily.
You move it on from there.
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah. I don't reproduce the photograph in that way. The photograph's always there. It's always present in the work, but it's not necessarily a very strict guide that then becomes the final painting.
It's like a driver, a starting point to again jump from.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously they found lots of photographs and torn up ephemera in Bacon's studio. We actually have some shots of Bacon's studio. Would we find lots of ephemera in your studio? Yeah, lots of torn up bits and pieces that go towards your...
Yeah, there's piles and piles of photographs and books and things stuck to it. It's quite not that, it's not that bad. But yeah, it's very much, where's that bloody thing gone? And I'm trying to look for things, and there's piles of drawings and acetates and magazines, and well, you've been there.
White Holes painting, the hair, I don't know which way it was. Yeah.
Yeah, that one.
Because to me, that's as much about that yellow line and the grid as it is about the subject. Is that how you want them to be seen?
Yeah, well, that's it. I want the subject and the way it's painted, or the structure of the painting to morph, and that's what I like about Bacon. Just that pink line through the background, to me, is like the most prominent thing in that. in that painting.
Cuts it in half and hits you kind of thing.
The way you can contain abstract brush marks, you can give them a position, so you can make them do what you want to do. You can position them, you can give them a hierarchy, and all those kind of things. If you've just got a canvas that's abstract painting, I can't do that.
It's
I need
almost
some
like
containment.
You talk about your paint in a very object-type way.
Well, it's about control, isn't it? Everything's masked, and then I decide which bits I'm going to paint, and I take the masking tape off, and there's a freedom, but there's still masking tape underneath. So then when I take that off, there's a containment. So there's always this idea of abstraction, and yet there's this line all the time, this drawing, or this photograph source that holds everything together.
There must be an element when you take off that masking tape, when you really don't know what's going to happen.
Oh God, no, it's awful at the moment. You know, maybe 1 in 4 survives, and then the paint stripper comes out. You know, it's really a process of making lots of bad paintings, but it's good to make bad paintings.
It is, yes. We had that discussion. Oh, we have another question just here.
This is following on from you were saying. If you want us to look at your paintings like completely formally, like about the paint and the colours, how would you argue that your paintings are contemporary, and do they like work as a document of 2014?
Well, I suppose they're contemporary because they're made now. I don't know. I make them, and I just saying I don't want anyone to know my source material. I don't think that's important. And I think I make it, I construct it, I put everything together, and then it goes out, and how you read it is how you read it. I don't have any... For me, the minute the painting leaves the studio, my commitment to it is over. And I'm on, great, there's something in there that I want to use, and I'm going to make the next one. So I don't think you can project too much meaning onto your own work. I think you have to allow people to read it in the way they want to read it. It doesn't bother me. I don't get upset if people don't see what I see, or they...
Yeah, I think, you know, it's funny, when I was given this topic, painting as a document, I kind of thought, what does that mean? And, you know, basically, I think, and it didn't have anything to do with why I chose a particular painting that I chose, which maybe was chosen for kind of very contrarian reasons, and that I just like to find things that are kind of odd and overlooked, and that I don't know anything about, so I can see if I can find out anything about it. But you know, I think if a person is of their time, whatever they do is inevitably of that time and not of another, and they don't have to actively think of strategies to make it timely. You know, people from another time will be able to just look at it and say, oh, you know, that is so 2014, or something like that. You know, because nothing like that was being done at another time or a later time, or something similar was done, but it really had some kind of fundamental difference to it. Contemporaneity is not a pose, it's a condition.
Have this lady just over here?
There seems to be, from the audience and from the panel, a sense that the idea of a documentation has to be one thing. But yet, what I'm hearing is this kind of layers of documentation, that you approach it from a historical angle, an autobiographical angle of the painter, but also, more interestingly here, as a sort of like a resource for techniques and problem solving. So when you actually approach your own work as a painter, you have this reference and this documentation that's vast and massive of what painters have done in the past when they've, you know, faced similar issues. And this is particularly for Claire. You know, are there other painters you've looked at when you've hit problems and issues in your own work, and they've helped you resolve them in the way that Bacon has?
I think you go through phases in your career where you feel closer to different artists. You know, I had a Piper phase, a Nash phase. The Nash phase lasted a long time. You know, yeah, definitely. I look at Louise Bourgeois a lot. I look at Barbara Hepworth, Henry Moore. You know, not so much. I look at a lot of contemporary art, but I kind of like the dead ones for really having that distance. They're not working in the same time as me, and there's this distancing. So. Yeah, and I know you're probably. It's a paint that it's not a feminine thing. It's not a say, oh, if I paint this, so don't start. It's not like I'm painting a pink painting, so oh my god. It's not that. It's just pink is just a really hard colour to use. It's really hard. It dumbs things down. It doesn't work with other colours. And when
pigments and the light.
Mixing pink enamel, seriously, it's just like you're going to paint a child's bedroom. You're just like, oh God, you know. And every time I tried to mix it a bit more yellow, a bit more brown, it just didn't work. I could not get it to work. So that was when looking at Bacon and seeing there's purples, there's browns, there's greens, you know, all the other colours that make up his pink. That's when that mistaken point, the pink image. Yeah. So that was how so the background on that painting was painted in one go, wet. So I started off with the pink bedroom colour and then adding the colours into the wet paint. And that was the point where I was like, oh, I need to be able to use oil. I need to be able to get a layering and a kind of opacity meter, like on Photoshop. You know, I need a 0 to 100 where I can, in some areas, it can be really thick and then you can press the brush. It's about pressure. And the gesso lights up the paint, which you can't do with enamel. So, yeah.
This idea of painting and the history of painting and historical painting sitting there as this massive resource for painters and as a document of techniques, basically, and kind of problem solving.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely.
I think it's only natural that when you look at painting,
well, it's just like a massive source book, isn't it? You can just go, and it's not just painting. It's like you look at Cy Twombly. I look at his sculpture a lot and look at the colours in the sculpture. Franz West, you know, he uses pink really well, and that was another person I was looking at. So it's not necessarily painting. It's.
All right, I think we have time for one last question. I think possibly. Oh, we have one at the back. The lady just right in the middle back.
Thanks. I'm just interested, you mentioned painting an autobiographical and looking at the comparison of the two paintings chosen today. And I wonder if what's interesting is that obviously the first painting by Roussel was around the time that photography came about, and painting was allowed to become more about paint. And you look about the painting by Francis Bacon, and in that instant, it becomes very much more a document of the artists themselves, as the fact that painting became about paint liberated them so much more from the subject matter and how that affects the documentary qualities of the painting. I wonder if that's interesting between the comparison of the two works.
Sorry, was there a question? Okay.
Sorry, yeah. Just interested in, for example, how the first work by Roussel doesn't necessarily contain that document of the artist, whereas the one by Bacon does. We talked more about the effect of the painting than the actual subject matter itself.
Is that because we know more about it? It's more,
or is it? Do you think it's because you can see the gesture on the surface, or?
Well, that's what I was wondering. You said that you found the Bacon painting difficult because you know so much about Bacon, but perhaps it's because the painting contains that much more of the artist.
Well, I suppose that small point on the Roussel where you can see the physical, does that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just disagree with the idea that the painter only kind of shows his hand by showing his hand, that it's through only brush marks being evident that the work of and the thought of the painter is revealed. I think it's revealed in lots of other ways, and I tried to point out in the Roussel how the presence of the painter as a kind of off-stage character in the room with the person that he's painting, and the difficulty of establishing a kind of proper distance or of knowing what that is a part of what the painting makes you conscious of. I was also interested that you brought up photography as an element in this somehow, because of course, the kind of the blur of Bacon, which to me is kind of a precursor of the blur of Richter, is actually a photographic effect that's been imported into painting. It's not a purely painterly thing. It's a kind of reflection of what happens in photographs when someone, moves while the shutter was open, or so on. So, I mean, there are a lot of things that can come from photography aside from, like what's called photorealism.
I think we might have to finish it up there. Or do we have time for one more question, do you think?
Very quick question.
One more quick question.
Yes. Did I see a hand down here? No? No? Well, we did have there was one question sent.
Oh, yes, we'll see, do we have time for this? This is slightly contentious. This is a question that's come from Twitter. We had a Twitter profile and a Facebook profile for the event, and there's a question that came here from someone anonymous. Nowadays, most artists go to do installation, video, and moving image. These works almost replace the function of painting. Do you think there is still something that only can be expressed by painting?
Yes. And the reason why, the reason why these other things exist is precisely because they can express different things that painting maybe can't express, and painting has things that it can express that a movie can't express.
Yeah.
That's easy.
I would say that's a perfect ending.
Yes.
Well, if there's no more questions, I'd like to invite you all to Chelsea Space. It's just on the corner within the parade ground, just in front of Chelsea College of Art. I'd like to say a huge thank you to Barry Schwabsky and Claire Woods. I'd like to say another huge thank you to Sonia and everyone at the Tate and everyone at University of the Arts London, and Jeff Dennis for all the help and organisation he's done with this. And other than that, hope you can continue.
The audience for joining us.
Yes, and hope you can continue the conversation over in. Yes, and Barry will be on hand to sign copies of his book, which is really, really good. Okay, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.